Welcome to the Early Edge College Football Pick Show, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I am your host, Eric Cohen. It was a good week for the show last week. 3 out of 4 of our upset picks cashed. Let's see if we can follow it up for week 11 of the college football season. But first, let's bring in the stars of the show. We have the master of the first quarter underdog. It's M squared, Mike McClure. Our next expert is up more than 11 units in our Dogs of the Week segment, Emory Hunt. And don't worry, the great Chip Patterson from the Cover 3 podcast will join us later in the show. But guys, I know you're fired up about these college football playoff rankings that were released last night. Mike, we're going to start with you. What's your one hot take on the initial rankings?
I'm not terribly surprised. I think that we knew that it was going to be heavy SEC, and I think that's what we're going to get. I think the real thing that's going to throw a wrench into everything is what's shaking out in the Big 12 right now, because you've got a couple of teams like Colorado, K-State, Iowa State, who now has a loss. I like almost all of those teams straight up in a rematch, for K-State's sake, against BYU in a potential title game. So if someone else in the Big 12 gets in as an at-large, that's going to squeeze things out for some of those group of 5 schools, because I don't see SEC teams getting left out here. And when you look at these particular standings, I think BYU is all but guaranteed to be in the title game. But again, I don't think there's some massive favorite over Iowa State, Colorado, or Kansas State. You look at the Big 12 every week, it seems like every game is a 2.5 to 3.5 point spread. That's where it's going to be. So if someone beats BYU in that title game, oh man, someone's going to be very frustrated when it comes to making the college football playoff.
I just really hate the non-brand name type of rankings that they did, because you have a BYU there that has played phenomenal football, has a win over SMU, and Indiana that's undefeated. And so you have those two teams. If they were named anything else, preferably a SEC team or a Big Ten team, they would a brand name Big team in terms of Indiana, they'd be in a college football playoff ranking. So because they're not brand names, despite what the on-field play has done or has been, those guys are not getting rewarded, and it's a shame.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. Now, Emory, one of your teams, and we're going to start with Mike on this one, Army. Mike, should they be ranked higher than 25th?
They should be ranked higher than 25th. I don't think that they should be a top 10 team, despite having the undefeated record, and they look great. The fact is they would still be 2 touchdown underdogs to almost every team there in the top 10. So the thing for me is, yes, they should be ranked higher. I say 18 to 20. Like anything above 20 is flat out disrespectful. I could get behind really anything between, say, 15 to 20, but 18 to 20 is that range where I've got it in the computer, which is an extremely respectable spot to be in college football. So I think that, yes, they're being disrespected. I would love to see them get in. I can't wait for that matchup with Notre Dame, but 25 is definitely too low for Army.
You got to reward winning. Look at that graphic that we just showed. Army's, their worst loss. You can't find it because they're undefeated. So when you think about these teams like Indiana, BYU, Army, reward teams that haven't lost. I don't care who you play. It is hard to be undefeated. We see this every single week in college football. Army has done a great job just dominating the competition, playing whoever's on their schedule. They have another really good game this weekend against North Texas, a very underrated offense. So if it ties into my first point of if Army was, in the SEC, they will be ranked top 10. And I know people say, well, that's because they're playing the SEC schedule. They don't even want to rank Vanderbilt or South Carolina high because they don't have that brand name, despite them racking up some really good wins. So just reward winning. Army, Indiana, BYU should all be respected more.
Yeah, but Emory, hold on a second. Army hasn't played anybody. I mean, we just saw that graphic. Have they beaten a team that's going to go to a bowl game? Now, Notre Dame in a couple of weeks will be a big deal. But outside of that, I mean, this team has played literally nobody.
When they beat Notre Dame, people will say, well, I mean, Notre Dame really lost to Northern Illinois. The goalposts will constantly move and shift. So that's the whole point of the argument. You can't have it both ways.
Fair enough. All right, M squared. Let's talk about the SEC, as you alluded to earlier. With their current positioning, how many SEC teams can make the college football playoff?
3 is a bare minimum. They're getting 3 in no matter what. I think they can get 4. I want to lay out the nightmare scenario for everyone here. The nightmare scenario is Bama, beats LSU this week at LSU. Ole Miss beats Georgia on their home field, and then next week, Georgia turns around and beats Tennessee. If that happens, this is going to be a situation where we're putting 4 SEC teams in this college football playoff, and Ole Miss is going to be in the SEC title game. So I think this is going to be an absolutely fascinating week in the SEC. They're getting 3 for sure. I think it's more likely that they're ultimately going to get 4, though, because I think Ole Miss is a live dog this week, and I think Bama is primed to upset, if you want to call it that, LSU on the road in Death Valley. So I'm going to say 4 is what they get, bare minimum 3.
Yeah, I'm going to say 3 because, again, going back to the rankings, how they are positioned, they want to get 3 or 4 in because you notice the trend here. Oh, this team beat this team. They were ranked higher. Oh, we got to now. If Ole Miss beats Georgia, they're going to fly Ole Miss up to number 3, put Georgia down to number 8, and then if LSU and Alabama, whoever wins that, going to move up a little bit. You see how they just musical chairs to where they're going to get 3 or 4 teams in, even though they are probably not deserving. Just because they play in the SEC, they're going to get that. That rubber stamp mark of this team is a good team despite having 5 losses. So I would say 3, and I'm with Mike. I also can see 4 making it if his scenario plays out perfectly.
Yeah, I can see 4 as well. It just depends. As you said, Ole Miss beating Georgia this week is a key to that, in my opinion. All right. And finally, Clemson, 23rd after that loss to Louisville. M-squared, you were at the game. Do they have a path to the college football playoff without making the ACC championship game?
I mean, there is a mathematical path, I would say, but I'm going to say no for the sake of the question here because I think we're getting those 4 SEC teams in. And ultimately, I think what's going to happen in the Big 12 is someone beats BYU. BYU gets the last spot. The Big 12 gets 2. So if you got 6 divided up between SEC and Big 12, we already know what the Big 10 looks like. I ultimately think it's whoever wins the ACC, and the ACC is going to be the conference that gets squeezed here. It's going to be one team from the ACC, in my opinion. So if they don't make that title game, I'm going to go ahead and say no. They have ruined their chances of a college football playoff.
I hate to sound like a broken record, but yes, there's a path. See name brand, and you follow the flow chart. If there's Clemson a name brand, yes, they will make the college football playoff regardless. So that's the thing. As long as they win and rack up some impressive wins, some style point type wins, this team will find a way to get into the postseason because the worst case doomsday scenario that I threw out there on CBS Sports HQ is to not have a lot of these brand names in the first iteration of this college football playoff. So Clemson, all you have to do is just remain with the name Clemson, and you'll be able to get into the postseason.
In my opinion, if SMU were to win out in the regular season and then beat Miami in the ACC championship game, the ACC gets 2 in. Clemson, there's nothing they can do. They're out. If it works out that way. All right. Let's talk about sportsline.com here. If you are not a member, you are missing out. Use promo code WINNERS for 60% off an annual plan. There's no better deal that's advertised on the site. You're getting an annual plan 60% off. Join Sportsline best bets, model picks, M-squared picks, Emory picks, chip picks, my picks, prop stars, Larry, a bunch, so many experts that I'm failing to name right now. Check that out. Promo code WINNERS, 60% off an annual plan. All right, coming up next, Indiana is undefeated, but do they need style points just in case they lose more than once? We'll make our Week 11 selections here on the Early Edge College Football Pick Show. Welcome back to the Early Edge. And if Ole Miss loses at home to Georgia, can we safely rule them out of the college football playoff? They're 2.5-point underdogs at home. Total is 54.5. Mike, we're going to start with you. Which way are you leaning this week?
I'm leaning the Ole Miss way here in this one, EC. Look, this team is just a couple of plays and ordinary plays, not miraculous plays, ordinary plays away from being an undefeated team. I know you got to win, and wins count. They lost a tough one in Death Valley against LSU, and then that game against Kentucky. But this team here, to me, projects as a top 5 team in college football, just like Georgia. And the season is just on the line. Georgia is a team that has started slow in games. Ole Miss starts fast in games. If Ole Miss can play from in front, you start to have some success, because what Ole Miss does really well, they stop the run, and they've got a legitimate defensive line. If they're able to put Georgia in passing situations and put the game solely on the shoulders of Carson Beck, that's where I think Ole Miss can have some success. It is absolutely critical that they score early in this game. And if they do, I think that this is a spot where Lane Kiffin finally breaks through, gets a big win that ultimately puts his team in the college football playoff. I'm leaning Ole Miss here to beat Georgia.
Yeah, I'm taking Ole Miss as well. And here's the reason why. One, they have the better quarterback in Jackson Dart. And two, he's athletic and is mobile enough to where if there's pressure, he has no qualms of taking off and just going and get the first down yards himself. So that's the difference. And you can play the what if game a little bit. If DJ Lagway stays in that game, Florida beats Georgia. If Quinn Ewers just takes off and runs and gets the cheap yards, just not becomes a statue in the pocket, they probably beat Georgia. Ole Miss will do all of those things and will beat Georgia. So I will take Ole Miss plus the points.
Oh, man, love this game. So many different angles, so many different ways to attack it. Things that stand out that are very important to me. The fact that Ole Miss's defense has been so good up front. I think that Georgia's really going to struggle to run the ball. I think they're going to get in Carson Beck's face. And I think that Carson Beck, who has 11 interceptions in the last 5 games, is going to have to really be coached out of going out there and making another mistake. I think Georgia, therefore, is going to start a little bit conservatively. I don't see a lot of offense from them. But what I do see is I see a Georgia defense that is just going to eat. Because Ole Miss, I think that when you aren't able to run the ball effectively, Georgia is able to defend you in a way similar to the way that they defended Texas, where they did not defend the run game at all, and they really decided to make Quinn Ewers go out there and beat him. And so when you don't have leading rusher Henry Parrish in the lineup, left the game with an injury, he's not on the depth chart, an offensive line that, while they're getting healthier, has had their issues over the last month or so, I see this one being a real stalemate early. So that's why my best bet, which is of course the business that we have here, is to go first half under 27.5. I think that this is both defenses rule the day early.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick, Chip. Also, Emory, I want to give you credit. You said earlier in the year that you were not a huge fan of Carson Beck, and you're right. I mean, 8 interceptions in his last 3 games. Got to give you props on that. Evan, you were spot on there. Beck has not been impressive. But these defenses that Chip talked about, Ole Miss giving up 13 points a game, Georgia giving up 17 points a game. And in Lane Kiffin's home games that he's coached since 2012, the under is hitting at 67%. Ole Miss at home only giving up 10 points a game, and they had played 7 straight unders before last week. I think it's going to be 8 out of 9. Ole Miss 27, Georgia 23. All right, this line, you talk about like look ahead lines from the preseason. Nobody on the planet would have had Indiana minus 14.5 against Michigan. It's unfathomable, but here we are. Indiana has won. They're undefeated, and they have covered in 8 straight games. So, Emory, we're going to start with you. Are you riding the Indiana wave this week?
Absolutely. Coach Daddy, I spoke about it last week. He understands the situation, understands the severity of how they're being disrespected nationally amongst pundits, and also with the rankings. They have to go out here and win big. All you hear is they haven't played anybody, although they lie in the Big Ten, but they haven't played anybody. So I expect them to go out there and take care of business. Yes, I am laying these points with the Hoosiers. Curtis Rourke, the number 1 year's CFL, he's a Canadian citizen as well.
So I'm going to be looking at a play that I've made several times around here, and it is that the Indiana Hoosiers play to the whistle. And not just the whistle of every single play. The Indiana Hoosiers play all the way to the final whistle at the end of 60 minutes. That Indiana has been an elite, I will say it again, elite 4th quarter team. So, they went down 10-0 against Michigan State last week. And of course, as we know, ran off 47 unanswered points. They gave up more than 100 yards in the first quarter. They gave up about 50 yards in the second quarter. They gave up 28 yards in the third quarter. And gentlemen, The Indiana Hoosiers defense in the fourth quarter against Michigan State of a blowout game, 0 net yards allowed. They get better as the game goes deeper. Their defensive line applies more pressure. They get more tackles for loss. Their offensive line is able to get even more of a push. I just love this opportunity to capitalize that no matter who the opponent is, no matter what the score is, Indiana has been outperforming its opponent in the fourth quarter. It, to me, is, if you're going to do signal and noise, that's all coaching. That's Curt Cignetti, and that's the impact he's had on this team.
I don't disagree with anyone here on Indiana. I do think this is an interesting time to fade them, though, in one area, and I think it's the scoring, and it's really just a friendly number with the math here. It's 31.5. That's the team total. I can go under this number. They can win this game with 31 points, cover the spread, and we're still cashing this ticket here, but I think there are a number of paths to Indiana under 31.5 cashing. First of all, Michigan, they're not as good as anyone wanted them to be this season, right? But they're still good defensively, and they know if they're going to win a game like this, they're not winning it by scoring 31 points themselves. It's going to be an ugly grinder. They're going to run the clock here. I think that that's what happens. IU, while the defense has been phenomenal, the offense has been extremely shaky, especially in first halves of these games. If they're not able to put 14 to 17 points on the board in the first half of this game, I think it's going to be an uphill battle to 31.5 or 32 plus. So give me Indiana's team total here. Again, still think that they can cover the spread, but I'm going under 31.5 on a team total.
All right, M squared. I can get on board with it. Now, my final score may not necessarily agree, but I'm okay with it. Because style points matter, though, with this week's schedule. It's not like Indiana may go the entire year, assuming they lose to Ohio State in a few weeks, and not beat a ranked team. I mean, it's true. So they have to look impressive. We know they're 8-0 against the spread, as I mentioned, from week 2 on. Michigan has only played 2 road games. They're 0-2 against the spread on the road. Curt Cignetti, the Indiana coach, now dating back to last year at James Madison, 16-3 against the spread in his last 19 games. I think Indiana rolls this week. Give me Hoosiers 37, Wolverines 13. We are not done with the Week 11 top matchups. 2-loss Alabama takes on 2-loss LSU. Is this another college football playoff elimination game in the SEC? Find out next on The Early Edge. Back on the Early Edge, and let's start with a fun one in the Big 12. Deion Sanders has Colorado in position to contend for the Big 12 championship. Will those hopes evaporate this weekend against Texas Tech? Now, I was really excited to hear what Emory would have to say, since we know he loves Deion and Shedeur and Colorado, but he's having some technical difficulties. We'll have him back on here shortly. But M squared, you actually agree with Emory's pick. What is it?
I do. I agree on Colorado here, EC. When I look at this matchup, they've got a massive edge when it comes to the offensive side of the ball, in my opinion. They're going to be able to put up points in this matchup. And I ultimately think it does come down to the motivation spot here. When you look at Colorado and the journey over the last year and a half, this is what it's all come down to. There's been such high expectations. They've performed well at times. They've drastically underperformed at times, but they've got a golden opportunity right in front of them. And that opportunity is to just simply win every football game in front of you the rest of the way. You've had the bad loss. You're getting bailed out a little bit because of the way the Big 12 shook out last week. I think that they take advantage of this opportunity. I think the numbers should be a flat 4 at a minimum, because I think that the offense is just going to hum. I think Shedeur is going to be special. And ultimately, I think Colorado has this big opportunity, and they seize it at least this week with another win.
Oh, Mike, I love all of that. And so I'm going to, take your explanation, and I'm just going to build on it, dive a little bit even deeper, or get a little more specific, because what I'm targeting here is about that Colorado offense. It is about Shedeur Sanders. It is about Travis Hunter making those crazy one-on-one plays in the passing game. I'm going to go Colorado team total over 33.5. Now, of course, at 33.5, you've got a good number there with 34s and 35s popping up frequently in these kinds of games. But more than anything, it to me is about the matchup against a Texas Tech defense that has been very, very vulnerable to the pass attack. Teams all year long have kind of shredded them through the air. Clearly, we did not see that just last week as the Red Raiders were able to get the upset win. But, man, we're talking about one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country. We are talking about the best player in the entire country in Travis Hunter. I just see Colorado hitting a lot of explosive plays against this Texas Tech defense, which, just like a cherry on top here, Texas Tech's defense is a little bit banged up too. So while Behrens Morton and Taj Brooks, Texas Tech has had some things that have been going their way in the last couple weeks. Sure, I also think more than anything they don't have answers for how to stop this Colorado passing attack. So I'm going Buffs team total over 33.5.
And that's a great pick, Chip. I said the other week on this show that every home game that Texas Tech plays in Lubbock from here on out this season, I'm taking the over. So I love the over 62.5 this week. The average score in 5 Lubbock games this fall is 45-39, which is way over this total. Colorado has 5 straight covers against unranked teams. We saw that graphic. Texas Tech also has the second worst pass defense in the country, giving up more than 307 yards per game. This one is going to see a bunch of points. Colorado 41, Texas Tech 35. All right, Emory, I know you love some Colorado. I know you love Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, Deion Sanders. Why are you playing the Buffs minus 3.5 this weekend?
Their offense versus that Texas Tech pass defense is the biggest play, and also this secondary. It's probably the best secondary they'll face this season. I'm talking about Texas Tech offense. So the matchup just doesn't favor the Red Raiders, which is why I'm taking the Buffs.
Fair enough. All right, here we go. Alabama and LSU. I referenced this at the end of last segment. Is this an elimination game for the college football playoff? Number 11 Alabama, number 15 LSU, and the Crimson Tide are 3-point favorites. Chip, you're going to start us off not with a regular pick, with a first quarter pick. What do you have?
Yeah, baby. All right. So Kalen DeBoer, I think, is phenomenal at being able to get an offense ready for the start of the game. We remember in that Georgia game how Kirby Smart even told the broadcast that they were totally thrown off by what the Crimson Tide were doing schematically offensively. We remember Alabama being able to jump all over Wisconsin. There have been spots this season, even in the Tennessee loss, it was Alabama leading at halftime. I think in this game going up against LSU's defense, we are going to get a very sharp script, a very strong first 15 plays from the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think Jalen Milroe will benefit from having the week off because, to me, he has not looked 100% healthy or 100% right. That means more designed runs for Jalen Milroe, keeping that LSU defense off balance. I just think that there's a big-time scheme advantage for Kalen DeBoer going up against the LSU defense. And while trying to defend 4 quarters of Garrett Nussmeier might prove to be difficult, ultimately the thing that I'm most confident in is that the Crimson Tide will go into Death Valley and will go and get themselves a hot start. So we're going Alabama in the first quarter.
I like it, Chip. I like Bama a lot in this game, honestly. Played at -3. I already played at -2.5 over on sportsline.com. I made the number 4 here, which is a very different number. When I look at this particular matchup for Alabama, first of all, I agree with you. The time off, absolutely critical for this team, especially Jalen Milroe. But I think that LSU was exposed a little bit against Texas A&M in that second half, and it has to do with facing a mobile quarterback. Jalen Milroe can do some of the things that we saw Texas A&M do, but he's still got the better element of the passing game and one of the best wide receivers in the country. So for me, like you, thinking that there's going to be a hot start, I think there will be a fast start for Alabama, and that's going to put LSU into obvious passing situations. That is where LSU struggles, is where they're not playing neutral, where they have to play throwing the football, dropping back nearly every play. That's where the pressure is going to get to Nussmeier. Give me Alabama here.
I agree with you, Mike. Give me Alabama. Simply put, for me, this is Garrett Nussmeier versus defensive pressure. We saw what that looked like against Texas A&M. Honestly, we've seen what that looks like against every team that they face that has been able to get pressure, not just pressure from the defense, but pressure of the situation. He doesn't handle those things rather well either. So for me, this is an Alabama get-right game. Just so happens to be a rivalry game against a top 15 opponent. So I'm taking the Crimson Tide.
Chip, you ruined my EC Island opportunity here. I was all excited to have another EC Island, and you had to pick a first quarter play. Nonetheless, I'm taking LSU on the money line. Listen, the Tigers, 13-0 in night games under Brian Kelly. M squared, he was at the Ole Miss game earlier this year. He can attest to it. He might be there again this weekend to see it. LSU, 14 straight home wins. LSU won 5 of 6 against ranked teams at home. But here's another thing. The last 4 Alabama head coaches lost their first game against LSU. Mike DeBose, Dennis Franchione, Mike Shula, and Nick Saban. The last Alabama coach to win his first game against LSU, Gene Stallings in 1990. Also, one more thing. Underdogs in SEC conference games, 29-12-1 against the spread. Give me LSU 28, Alabama 24. All right, last game, we have a bonus game this week. The Holy War up in Utah, number 8 BYU against Utah, the team that everybody was picking to win the Big 12. But they stink. I mean, they've lost 4 straight. Let's start with you, Mike. Which way are you leaning on this game?
I'm leaning Utah at +4. I think the number should be 2.5 here. So it's literally just a play on the number, the style of play. I think this is a competitive, lower scoring game. We know it's going to be obviously a night game in this spot. And while Utah's been extremely frustrating and not having a season anywhere close to what they expected, I think that they're going to be up for this game. And if there were a spot for BYU to get tripped up a little bit this season, I think it is this particular spot right here. So ultimately, I will say BYU probably comes out victorious, but I think it's going to be a competitive football game. You're giving me that key number of 4. I will take all 4 of those points.
So Utah has lost 4 straight. The last time that Utah scored 20 points was September 21st. Utah's offensive coordinator has resigned. Utah's quarterback, Adam Driver, hasn't been alive for most of the season. And so what in the world because it's the Holy War, because this rivalry is bananas, because if there is one moment that this Utah team's going to be able to get up off the mat, drag someone into the muck, and be able to just find a way to go win a rock fight, I think BYU is going to try to apply pressure defensively, and that's why your guys like Money Parks, Dorian Singer, Brant Keithy, you got to get the ball to the perimeter and just try to get plays, because I'll tell you what, 20 points will win this ball game. I think that Utah at home, Rice Eccles, the must. If it's the college football spot, right? Because college football, because it is late night in Salt Lake City in a rivalry game, I'll take those points.
I'm taking BYU. I like the secondary matchup here for the Cougars. I think they have some tremendous corners, in my opinion, and use all of my analysis from the Indiana-Michigan game and apply it to this one. BYU understands they cannot lose this game. The nation wants them to lose so they can put another brand name insert SEC team into their spot. So of course you're going to get the best of BYU in this matchup against Utah, their hated rival. So I am taking the Cougars here because, one, their defense is excellent. I like what they do on the corners, and offensively they'll find ways to make a couple of plays to cover the spread.
Great pick, Emory. It's rare that you and I agree, but actually I'm going with you on this one. I like BYU -4, and I'll tell you why. Because Utah stinks. I mean, they lost to my alma mater, Arizona, who stinks almost as badly as Utah does. So you know what? I can't pick the Utes here. I understand it's a rivalry game, and normally I would love to pick the home team. But this Utah offense, and their 4 losses, they're averaging 10 points a game. And they're converging over under trend, so I didn't really have a total. That total, like 40.5, is kind of weird. BYU, it's funny, in 7 of 8 games this year, they've scored between 34 and 41 points. They're not going to do that this week, but they're a good team, and they're going to find a way to cover this game. Give me BYU 23, Utah 16. All right, we have gone through the top games of Week 11, but now it's time to see our best bets. Coming up next on the Early Edge. It is time for our best bets here on the Early Edge. Here comes Squared rising up the leaderboard with another 2-0 week. He's getting on Emory's heels here, and all I can do is go 1-1. It's kind of frustrating. All right, it is time for Week 11 Best Bets, my favorite segment of the show. M Squared, you are on a heater right now. Give us your first pick.
It's got to be the Ole Miss Georgia game. I'm focused heavily on what I would call these playoff elimination games. For Ole Miss, it's absolutely critical that they score in the first half of this game. I went over on their first half team total, over 12.5 minus 120. Love the fact that I can cash this with a touchdown and 2 field goals. If Georgia has a lot of success defensively, I think it's going to be in the red zone, potentially limiting to field goals. I'm very confident Ole Miss is still going to be able to move the football on them. Just considering the way Georgia starts games, which is slow offensively. They like to punt in the first half. I think that we're going to see extra possessions here for Ole Miss, and I think they can be efficient enough to either find 2 touchdowns or a touchdown and 2 field goals here. I love this team total for the Rebels, over 12.5 in the first half.
All right, got a little Friday night action for you in the Rose Bowl, where Iowa is going to be playing UCLA. And I want to make sure that I give, speaking of Rose Bowl, some flowers to head coach Deshaun Foster, because I think he has done a great job with this team. They are limited, but they are competing and they are fighting hard. And defensively, they've done a good job against almost every single opponent of limiting them in terms of yards and points to their season averages, or what we would expect coming into the game. And I think that going up against this Iowa team, we are going to see a similar result. And so I'm going to be targeting the total here, where Iowa's defense, I do think, is going to do a great job of bottling up the Bruins, but that UCLA's defense has really outperformed expectations on a week in, week out basis. And while Iowa's offense has gotten better since making the change to Brendan Sullivan, and while I have been a bit of factor of some Iowa overs, the contrarian play there, I think that this Bruins team is going to bring enough fight to be able to limit what Iowa can do. So I'm going Iowa UCLA under 44.5.
One thing you could say about me is that I am consistent. I'm going to lay these 5.5 points Army, because Army understands the assignment. They cannot lose. Everyone wants them to lose. They'll take care of business of North Texas and do what they need to do to make sure they go into that game against Notre Dame undefeated.
What would an early edge college football pick show be without an Army pick from Emory? That's what's so great about this. All right, I'm going Iowa State minus 2.5 against Kansas. Is this a trap line? Yeah, maybe it is, but I'm still rolling with it. Iowa State, despite their loss to Texas Tech last week, still in good position to make it the Big 12 championship game if they win out. Under Matt Campbell, they are 65% against the spread after a straight up loss, and they're covering by more than 5 points a game. And also, this team is road warriors. They're 7-0 straight up and against the spread in road games dating back to last year. I'm going Iowa State 34, Kansas 21. All right, M Squared, let's send it back around to you.
It's got to be the other playoff elimination game. It's Bama LSU at night, Death Valley. And I will say LSU is the real and the only Death Valley after my personal experiences here. Now, I love Bama in this game. Minus 2.5, minus 3. I made the number minus 4 here, which is a very big difference. When I look at Alabama, I think the time off is going to be absolutely critical for this team, specifically Jalen Milroe, who's going to use his legs here. I think LSU was exposed a bit against Texas A&M. I think the mobile quarterback is going to be the answer against this LSU defense, but it's really about out of the locker room, the scripted drives. Bama gets off to an early lead, puts LSU in obvious passing situations. Bama's D-line gets to tee off on Nussmeier. It's just a matter of time before he makes that mistake. Bama wins this game. Wouldn't shock me if they win it by double digits, but I love them covering the spread here, minus 2.5.
I am going back to the well because the well still has water and Daddy wants a drink. Okay, so Oregon in the first half has just been a machine in games where Oregon is a heavy favorite. I mean, we're talking about like 35-3, 28-10, 21-0, 28-10. No, the way that Oregon comes out and especially closes these first halves does a fantastic job of putting teams at a distance that they are not able to overcome in the second half. They're going to be back home. They're getting a visit from Maryland, and I expect that the Ducks' first half relentlessness continues. Got a favorable number here of the first half at minus 13.5. So I'm going Ducks in the first 30 minutes minus 13.5.
I'm going to hang out in the Sun Belt Conference with what I know best. Marshall has been playing some really solid football. They can take advantage of this Southern Miss football team that's going through a coaching change right now, so they may have already packed it in. So lay these points with the Thundering Herd. I expect Marshall to roll into Hattiesburg and roll out with the victory.
Emory, you should be proud of me. I'm going with a Conference USA game for my second pick. The Western Kentucky, New Mexico State over 51.5. New Mexico State's defense stinks. They're giving up nearly 37 points a game, which is 8th most nationally. Western Kentucky in 4 Conference USA games, they're averaging 39 a game. And in 3 home games against FBS teams, I did the math here, the average total points in New Mexico State, these home games, 69. Give me Western Kentucky 45, New Mexico State over 17, and we're going to fly over that 51.5 total. All right, let's recap them here. Emory is on Army minus 5.5 and Marshall minus 13.5. M squared on Ole Miss first half team total over 12.5 and Alabama minus 3, though he got the line at 2.5 on sportsline.com. Chip is on the Iowa UCLA under 44.5 and Oregon in the first half at minus 13.5. And I am on Iowa State minus 2.5 against Kansas and the Western Kentucky, New Mexico State over 51.5. All right, which Week 11 favorites are on upset alert and can our experts deliver another winning week? Find out next on The Early Edge. Welcome back to the Early Edge, and it's time for our Dogs of the Week. Look at this beauty last week. M squared crushing with those first quarter money lines. Emory back on the board, over 11 units to the good with Wyoming at plus 220. And I had Vandy. Feels like it's too easy. Plus 200 at Auburn. 3 out of 4 of us. Easy money last week. All right, M squared, we know what you're going to do. It's your thing now. A first quarter line. What do we got this week?
First quarter money line, picking on the same team as last week. We're going to run it back, betting against Indiana in the first quarter of these games. This Indiana team starts extremely slow offensively. They have a great defense. They get fired up and they pull away late in games. I think we could see a similar situation here, just like we saw last week against Michigan State. If Michigan's going to have any success in this game, it's very likely to come on the opening scripted drive where they're able to get points. And we know one thing they like to do is going to be run the football still. Regardless of who's playing quarterback, they know the only shot that they have of winning this game is to simply get the game to the fourth quarter as quick as they possibly can and hopefully be within 1 or 2 scores. So for me, I like the way that this sets up here at this price point at plus 250 because of the style of play here. If Indiana doesn't score on the first time they touch the ball, I think there's a good shot we're tied or winning this game with Michigan early. Indiana turns it on late. We'll go Michigan first quarter plus 250.
I like when Chip and I are seeing the game the same way because he talked about that Iowa UCLA under. And to me, I'm going to take it a step further. I think they can go out there and just knock off the Hawkeyes because they're playing better than what we saw earlier in the season. So I'm taking UCLA getting better at the right time, trying to get close to that 5th win, which would be impressive for them. They're over under the season, I think, was 3.5. So at the end of the day, I do like UCLA over the Hawkeyes for my upset.
So obviously, like the rest of America, I was watching Louisiana football last week. And I was watching the Raging Cajuns go out there and absolutely, just to like slowly pick apart that Texas State team. But that wasn't what made the notebook in terms of looking ahead to Week 11, though I remain very impressed with Louisiana. It's that Jordan McLeod left that game with an injury. And it's that Jordan McLeod, getting a little bit banged up did impact Texas State's offense. Is that Texas State, started the year looking like they were going to be, one of the hot teams in the Sun Belt, but now they've landed as about a 500 team in the Sun Belt. And I think that they might be in trouble going up against ULM, those Warhawks. Now, they've got a lot to settle out after that whole offensive line coach incident from last weekend, but I think that with Texas State potentially dealing with some quarterback issues, I think that a feisty ULM team can jump up and go get themselves a big win against the Bobcats.
Wait a second, Chip. Did you and Emory switch picks on purpose here? Normally he takes all the Louisiana teams, and then I thought you would take UCLA. I swear you guys are reading each other's picks. All right, I guess not. Hey, I'm going UAB plus 200 against UConn. I don't know how I found this one. Now, Trent Dilfer probably coaching for his job. Not looking so great, but Kitten has been really good. 788 yards and 8 touchdowns combined in his last 2 games. By the way, UConn has not played a road game since September 14th. It's time that they go on the road. UAB playing better. I'll take a shot at plus 200. All right, let's recap it here. Mike has taken Michigan in the first quarter plus 250 against Indiana. Emory's on UCLA plus 168 over Iowa. Chip is on Louisiana Monroe plus 220 over Texas State. And I am on UAB plus 200 against UConn. Chip, we were talking about earlier, over the break, we were talking about like random lines that you may like this week. And you came up with one that I thought was kind of strange. Tell us what it is.
Wait, which one? Hold on. You got to clue me in on that. I immediately forget what we just said.
Purdue and Ohio State. I mean, how can you bet Purdue, who stinks? How they are awful
in the first half only against an Ohio State team that has been slow starting offensively in a hangover spot after going and getting that big win against Penn State. I'm just saying, if you give Ryan Walters a 21.5-point lead and just ask him to defend it for 30 minutes, then you might find yourself walking all the way to the pay window. Just the first half.
Fair enough. Just the first half. I mean, that is what it is. That's fair. Emory, we know you love these off-the-radar games. Do you have one that we could pay attention to this week?
Well, that's why you should subscribe to sportsline.com, because this Saturday morning when the FCS lines come out, I'm going to flood the site with my FCS picks. So keep an eye for South Carolina State versus Howard. Chinnisberry, the head coach at South Carolina State in his first year, taking over for the legendary Buddy Pugh, has done a phenomenal job. They upset North Carolina Central last week, 21st ranked up North Carolina Central. Eric Phoenix, the quarterback, was his quarterback at Benedict, a Division II program that he led to tremendous heights. So this team looks like the MEAC representative to the Celebration Bowl. You can lay these points, whatever that line may be, against Howard.
I had no idea that Benedict was actually a school. So look at what you learned and check out sportsline.com. Emory is all over it from all these random games. All right, M Squared, what kind of random game do you have on your radar this week?
It's not that random, EC. It's another SEC night game, but it's the one no one cares about this week. It's Mississippi State and Tennessee, a night game at Neyland Stadium. I think that Mississippi State's team total in the first half is a good look. I'm going under 7.5. I think they might get a touchdown. They're not scoring twice in the first half. Tennessee, I like this spot for them. Pitch a shutout in the first half. Get some of the guys off the field in the second half. Get ready for that big matchup in Athens against Georgia next week. But I think we get a big effort from them defensively in the first half. Give me Mississippi State first half under 7.5.
Eventually it's been 11 weeks of doing the show. I would learn how to bet these first half, first quarter lines from you guys. At some point, maybe I'll learn. I'm going to pay attention to this segment especially, and we'll see how you guys do. The game that I'm kind of taking a look at this week, why is Vanderbilt a home underdog to South Carolina? Are we overrating South Carolina off that win? And are we underrating Vanderbilt, who just continually crushes teams when they are the underdog? Keep an eye on that plus 3.5 and sprinkle the money line if you would like. All right, guys, another awesome show as always. So much education here on the Early Edge College Football Pick Show. So for Chip Patterson, Emory Hunt, and Mike McClure, I am Eric Cohen. Thanks for watching the Early Edge College Football Pick Show. And as I always like to say, let's hit it big. Good luck.